All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kyle Cheslock. I'm the VP of Sales here with the Lead Tool. I'd like to thank everybody for attending our webinar today on how to optimize your inventory purchases in stock. Before we jump in, we'll give everybody a couple of minutes here that's kind of trickle in terms of arriving for our webinar here. But we will be sending this out via a couple different channels. We'll shoot you guys an email at the end of this, as well as we'll be pushing it out via some social media channels. So at the end of it, if you want to follow our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, there's a lot of great content, previous webinars that we ran that'll definitely provide some value to everybody there. And of course, anybody that couldn't make it here within your organization or a few of your colleagues, you feel like this could help out as well, feel free to share far and wide. We'll also have some contact information for you towards the end of our conversation today if you guys have any questions directly to us. Otherwise, most of your questions we'll probably end up answering here as we go along. But if you do have any, feel free to chat into us. There's a little chat functionality within the GoToWebinar area that feel free to chat in, and we'll answer those at the end of our conversation today. So with that being said, looks like we got people logging in right now. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started here. Many of you are probably asking, who are we? So a little background about us. Chase Shields, our CEO and co-founder of the Lead Tool, is going to be the one dominating the conversation today, and I'll sprinkle in my 2 cents here. But essentially, my background, I come from a pretty related field, as many of you guys probably will know, in real estate. I worked at a real estate software company called Dotloop, which, if anybody's ever looked at a home online, you probably heard of the website called Zillow. We ended up doing a couple of things right and getting acquired by them in 2015 for about $110 million. So experience, managed everything from a sales staff to all that good stuff. So with that being said, I'm going to turn the keys over to Chase here and let him take it for a drive.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you again to everyone for making time for us today. We very much appreciate that. And I'm going to dive a little bit more into my background here. Let's go over to the next slide. Hang on a second. Sorry about that. Go to webinars giving us some headaches here. Can't always win.
Technology, I'll tell you.
So anyway, a little bit of background on me. So prior to founding For Me Group and starting the Lead Tool and all that, I spent about 10 years in lumber distribution, manufacturing, and also drying. I worked for a 130-year-old family business. We specialized in imported domestic hardwoods, as you all can see up here on the slide. Basically, we served everybody from shops that were making patterns for big Caterpillar and John Deere engine block castings to high-end commercial fixtures, musical instruments, you name it. We had a millwork operation. Like I mentioned, we had dry kilns as well. My focus, other than cleaning toilets and shredding paper, was actually on helping with the inventory management. Did a lot of the logistics and a lot of the IT as well. Dealt with some of the vendors. After that, I got into automotive retail. So I lived on a showroom floor. I worked for brands ranging from Toyota all the way up to Maserati. I built some sales and inventory velocity models there for Porsche. Helped us figure out what to stock, how much of each item to stock, and so on and so forth. As a salesperson, I handled about 150 new leads a month when I was selling. So I've got a lot of experience actually selling as well. And since then, I've spent the last number of years building CRM, which is customer relationship management. Sales software. We're going to talk, I guess, a little bit about that when we talk about looking into purchase forecasting and things of that nature. So that is a little bit about me. And let's see here. Let's see if it'll let us dive into the next slide, which it's not. Wonder what's going on here.
Sometimes we'll be able to dive in right there.
Okay, awesome.
Should be good.
Great. Sorry about that. So here's our agenda. I just love to cover kind of what is optimized inventory purchasing. I'm sure many of you are familiar, but for those of you who are not, we're going to kind of walk through the nuts and bolts of that. Kind of just the facts and myths of purchasing and sales, because they're very tied together. But a lot of times, at least in my experience, some people look at it the wrong way. And in the economics of that relationship between purchasing and sales. From there, I'd like to dive into kind of figuring out what a product mix should look like, how to figure that out, and then ultimately talking about kind of mapping your inventory to your sales. So, first thing I just want to say is that all of the data you can get is going to be what's going to help guide this process for you. So understanding what you've purchased in the past, what you've sold in the past, and I can't emphasize enough, understanding your historical sales is going to really be the key to figuring out what that product mix is, and we're going to dive into that. So if you don't have systems in place today, it's going to be tough. Good news is there's a lot out there in terms of CRM, as well as purchasing and inventory. But without those systems, you're really going to be shooting in the dark. So keep in mind, the more data you can gather, both looking in the past and looking in the future, the better off we're going to be when we're trying to establish all of this. So one thing that I hear and that I really disagree with is that you make your money when you sell, which, I mean, I guess it's kind of true to the extent that if you can jack up the price a whole lot, great. But if you buy at the wrong price and demand will not support that price, you're basically up the wrong creek without a paddle, so to speak. So every time we hear that, we kind of think, really, go on. And let's dive into that some more, because realistically, it's just math. We can all really assume that our operating expenses on call it a monthly basis are relatively fixed. We know what labor is going to cost us. We know what our equipment is going to cost us. We know what our subscriptions are going to cost us, and kind of all of that stuff, the rudimentary things, payroll tax, all that. For us, it was kiln fuel, diesel fuel for the lifts, all of that stuff. If you're operating a warehouse, showroom, same kind of thing. So that's fixed. So let's say we're doing $1 million a month in monthly sales. That's awesome. And in scenario one, we only buy $500,000 worth of inventory. Awesome. The bottom line shows pre-tax income of about $250,000. The thing we don't want to do is be buying $800,000 of inventory and losing 50 grand. So you can see right here, like this really is just simple math. And we have a lot of control over what we buy, whereas we can't control demand. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more here. So again, we think in a lot of cases, you actually really make your money when you buy. So back to this whole point about what's in our control and what's not. We have control over supply. I know that there's obviously seasonality associated with that. Like, if you think about in the hardwood business, in wet season, prices go up because can't get logs out of the woods. But outside of that, and if you're buying manufactured goods, like, for any flooring retailers who are on here today, or kitchen and bath, where you're buying from a cabinet supplier, obviously sometimes your vendor's production capacity can't keep up. But those are going to be more limited circumstances. The big thing here is that we cannot control demand. We can't control customer demand, right? Customers come to us, they want what they want when they want it. So, basic economics, supply and demand, right? So we've got no control over demand, but we do have control over supply. So the conclusion here is that we can actually affect our bottom line by controlling what we're supplying, controlling what we have in stock. And again, just another quote that we hear, well, if I don't have it in stock, I can't sell it. I mean, I heard that back, when I was doing a lot of inventory, dealing with purchasing and sales. And it's not true. If that were true, I mean, heck, you'd be stocking toilets and water bottles, right? Because you can sell it. If you've got it in stock, you could sell it, right? But you can't. So what we really want to do is we want to think about inventory through this lens of being sales driven, not the other way around. what you stock is a result of what you sell. What you buy should be a result of what you sell. And what that's ultimately going to do for you, we're going to see here, is help you buy the right products, the right amount of the right products, and you're going to make more money because of it. So a couple things that we kind of need to know going into this is the first thing that I can't emphasize enough is we've got to look to the past before we can look to the future. So you've got to be able to look at your past sales data. That's going to help you establish a product mix, and I'm going to go through that a little bit more finitely here in a second. And Kyle, do you have something you wanted to
how far back would you go in terms of your historical sales data? 1 year, 5 years?
So that's a really good question.
Years?
So, I mean, I would almost argue, like right now, given the current economic climate, I mean, I'd be looking in the last 5 years, just because I think when you look back 10 years, we're talking about kind of Great Recession, different dynamics. Now, I will say, like we've been talking about here a lot, that housing prices are at pre-recession peaks. So there's a lot right now that is kind of
working against you.
Yeah, questionable. It feels really good right now, but being that we're 8 years, we're 94 months from the trough of the last recession, we're way closer to a peak.
It took less than 5 years for home values to go back above peak value. In 06, 07.
It's a little frightening. But either way, I'm looking at 5 years. I think when we would look in the lumber business, we would try to concentrate maybe on the last 24 months. Now, when I was building models for Porsche, we probably looked back closer to 5 years. And there are a lot of intricacies that go into the past sales data, particularly for those of you who are selling, again, a manufactured product. A vendor of yours may sell a certain color cabinet door, in North America, disproportionately compared to what you sell. So a lot of this, and I'm going to talk about it more, it's going to be localized. For flooring, a great example is in the Southwest, you're going to sell a lot more tile than you are carpet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, again, kind of knowing your market. So we've got to be able to look back. We also have to be able to look forward into the sales pipeline. So what is current demand for the products that we're selling? And of course, is there any demand for something we're not selling? From there, you've also, when you're looking at all this, you got to know what your lead time on products is, getting back to that whole idea of seasonality and hardwoods in the wet season. When it's wet, if we have snow for 3 months, red oak coming out of West Virginia, whether you're buying strip flooring or you're buying truckloads of 12 and wider kiln dried, it's going to be hard to get. The price is going to go up. So there's going to be, number one, a greater lead time, and number two, a higher price. The other thing is, this all kind of leads us in, and you're going to hear me talk more and more, and I'm going to beat on this product mix idea. And what I mean by that is, it's not how much of everything you're stocking, it's what you're stocking. Again, the flooring dealer in the Southwest, I don't want to be stocking a lot of carpet. I want to be stocking tile.
And that brings up a good point too. With a lot of showrooms that around the country, you could throw a dart, and it doesn't matter if you're in the Southwest, the Northeast, doesn't really matter. Many of us have just product on our floor that flat out does not move, and it's just taking up space.
Well, so that's exactly what happened to us in the car business, and the entire reason we went down this whole process of trying to figure out what we needed to stock and how much of everything we needed to stock, because the owner would walk out and there would be a blue 911, bright blue 911 that sat for 20 months or something like that. And for those of you who may be financing your inventory on a revolving credit facility, you don't want to be paying interest on that if it's not selling. I mean, I remember one specific example where we had a yellow, it was November of 09. We had a yellow 911, which is Porsche's high-end sports car. We sold more of those. A great example. We sold more sports cars than we did SUVs, which was against the national trend. Again, knowing Absolutely. Who we are in our demo. But we had a yellow 911 that, I mean, to sell it, I had to eBay it to somebody in Miami. Wow. In the middle of 09, I think we made like $90 on the sale on a $120,000 car. It was wrenching. But anyway, we wound up, now if you go to that showroom, everything on the floor is black, silver, or gray. And yeah, that's dull, but we're turning that.
What moves.
Right. And when we were in the middle of the recession, man, if we didn't have that stocking model, we were ordering the wrong cars with the wrong options. We would have been, again, floor planning everything, paying interest, and not turning the inventory. So, turning your inventory turn, which is something I'm sure all of you are keeping track of, how many times are you turning your entire inventory a year? You want to, if you're turning it 10 times a year, that's a lot better than turning it twice a year. Yeah. You want to make sure you're getting it in and out. Great example was that big yard we talked to the other day that had 20 facilities, and their competitive advantage was that they didn't order anything until they locked down a job and had a timeline on it. And then they mapped that to what their lead time was on their products. Yeah. And it's, one of the only yards we've heard talk about doing things that way, but it was a strategic advantage for them because they didn't have their money tied up and they could undercut their competition because they weren't stocking inventory. I mean, again, and something else to think about is if you're stocking inventory that's not selling, your money's tied up. So, you don't want that. So the last piece, again, mapping your inventory metrics to your sales. And eventually, when you've got enough data, you can do what we did in the distribution business. And we actually had a formula where we would only purchase on a monthly basis a certain percentage of sales. We studied it for long enough, and we knew that if we went over a certain percentage on a rolling basis, so if we were buying 70% of what we sold, not good. If we kept our purchases closer, if we're doing $500,000 a month, we wouldn't want to necessarily purchase more than $250,000 a month. Again, back to that slide on the math.
Knowing what you're moving.
It's just math. And we had a strong preference to stocking things that turned. 80-20 rule. You want to have in stock the things that are going to turn because that's what sells. Yeah, it's, maybe you're getting a 20-point margin instead of a 50-point margin. And a lot of people get hung up on margins, but if it's not turning, the margin doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't make a difference. So that brings us kind of to figuring out what your product mix should be. And let me stop for a second and talk about like what a product mix is. A product mix is what you stock, how much of each product you stock, and then when you break it down into subcategories, and I've got a more complex example we can kind of take a look at here, how much of each subcategory you stock. So in the car business, we had a 911. There were 27 different variants of that, and then they all had their own options, right? So to do that, we've got to start with historical demand, which is just historical sales. We've got to know how much we've sold in the past. So call it over the last 24 months. We have to have that data because that's going to actually tell us what we've done. Then we've got to be able to look forward. So we've got to look into our CRM system, and we've got to see what the current demand for each product, subproduct, whatever you want to call it, brand, line, style, doesn't matter. Whatever that is, what is the demand? What's coming down at you? That is going to dictate with your current stock, when you look and see what you have in stock to meet that demand, that's going to dictate what you have to spend money to bring in, or what you have to spend money on to bring in, rather. So the lead times, another thing to think about. How long does it take you to get each product? Every vendor obviously has different lead times. Some of them run slower, as all of you know. Sometimes it takes a lot longer than you want to get certain products, and that's very frustrating. You've got to be able to account for that, obviously, in your stocking too. So if you've got a particular product that you turn every 30 days, but it takes 60 days for you to replenish it, you're going to want to have quite a bit on hand. You're going to want to order in advance. That's a great scenario where maybe you buck the trend and you have to buy a little bit more than you normally would. I know when we did certain large deals, we did a deal for a fast food chain when they were getting started. Their first 600 stores had our Red Oak in them. We would buy 60 to 90 days in advance because we were turning it so quickly. And at that time, supply was pretty tight. So we had to bring in 10, 20, 30 truckloads in order to make sure we had what we needed to meet demand. But we only did that because we knew we had the demand. We lived and died by this goal.
Okay, how'd you know that you had the demand, right?
Because we looked out, so we you have that relationship with your customer, and we're tracking it, right? Like this was in the 80s, so we have very rudimentary type CRM stuff, a lot of it still being typewritten in most cases. There would be orders in advance. We'd work with our customers. Back to that yard we demoed the other day. they establish a timeline with their customers. So great thing to do for those of you who, particularly when you're working commercial deals, what is the customer's timeline? When does the material need to be on the ground? At what rate are they consuming the material? Which again, you can actually look at historical performance. We were throwing out POs for 20 truckloads until we had established that, hey, we're going to need 20 truckloads like on the ground at any given time just to service, a certain account. So it's a little bit of a combination of number one, working with your customer to figure out and logging that data and knowing what their timeline is, but also looking at the historical performance, which is challenging when you're ramping up. But if you have the conversations, and you should with your customers, and you've got great relationships with your vendors, hopefully. And hopefully in the rough lumber business, that was oftentimes about having multiple vendors. Now, granted, we had one incredible mill that basically serviced that entire 6-year run, which if you can find a vendor like that, incredible. That was awesome.
Hang on to them.
Yeah, hang on. Hang on to them and pay them fast. Pay them within the terms. I think we had,
fast pay, fast friends.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Dan says. So again, you want to be matching your purchases to your sales, which you do by having the conversations with your customers, understanding the timeline on their jobs, understanding how long it takes your vendors to get you the product, and then understanding what you've sold in the past and what's coming down the line. So a really basic example of this is if we just say, hey, I'm going to be a lumber yard. I've got, or I'm going to be a widget store. I've got 4 different widgets. They each break down into different percentages of my sales. So this is the kind of data that when I'm talking about historical sales data, this is what you want to look at. You want to know what percentage of your sales each product is. So all of these here, A, B, C, and D, actually have sub-products except for D. So I know that product A in aggregate is about half of my sales. I know that there are 5 sub-products, and I didn't denote it here, probably on the complex example after this, which we'll just take a look at. But we've got to know of that 50%, what percentage do those 5 make up? And let's say all of them have a 5-week lead time. Again, these are just the basics of things you're going to want to know. So what we can see here is that everything we're stocking, it makes up a certain percentage of our aggregate sales. So we break it down into the products, and then we break it down into the different segments of those products. We keep track of what they've been historically of our sales, what the lead time is on them, and then what we're going to want to do, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, is looking out into the future to figure out what we need to do from an inventory standpoint and purchasing. Did you have something you wanted to?
Yeah, so whether it's flooring, cabinets, countertops, lumber, decking,
sheet stock, roofing, windows. I mean, it doesn't matter. And our customers are doing all that stuff.
A little bit of everything, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, it doesn't matter if it's front doors for a builder account or, you've got a homeowner that's putting in, brand new LVT.
Yeah.
Like it's all you want to figure out, okay, if I'm that flooring dealer, what percentage of my sales is LVT? And then, there are a lot of solid LVT suppliers out there, some of whom we work with, right?
Yeah.
So what's, how much is Shaw? How much is Mannington? What do we need to do? Work with your TM, figure out, all right, what's your production looking like? And then only buy when you know that you've got to restock, right? Because that's what's going to maximize that gap between your cost of goods sold and your OPEX and your profit. I mean, that's where your profit is. So you want to make sure that that's the COGS is the minimal amount of your total revenue generated. So probably a more real world example is here's a screenshot from a mill that we took a look at a number of years ago before I was sitting here hammering away coding stuff. So, we were tracking by species. This is just a handful of them. We knew that in the Cincinnati area, our production for hard maple was roughly going to be 20% of our product mix. We knew soft maple would be 15. We knew red oak would be 30. We were going to saw, call it 5 different grades of each. So we'd saw our first and seconds. We had our 1, 2, and 3 common. We knew historically what our yield would be on each of those. So out of all of, call it attractive hard maple, we knew that we would get 21% of those logs would be sawn into first. 37% would be one common. We were also obviously going to be producing at that time. It was a heck of a lot cheaper to produce cants than it was flooring. The margin was just way better. Flooring, I mean, strip flooring, when we were doing this was a few years ago, there was just no market for it. And then road board. I think there was probably a little hold up with fracking at this point in time. But I'm sorry, you got
and
to.
essentially, you guys were able to, again, analyze that historical data to go back to the cans and why it was more affordable then.
Yeah, this is all. I mean, we were
now.
tracking. You can see in the top right corner, I have prices per HMR. It's cut off the screen. That's hardwood market review. I mean, we were consuming all of the industry data we could. So we took our data, we took industry. We wanted to know everything, man. Like
so data wasn't the bad guy.
No, data's never data's. Without, what's the saying? Without data, you're just someone else with an opinion. I mean, it
operate
just
off my gut.
Yeah, that doesn't work, man. Like, especially when things go south.
Because increased competition now too, right? I mean, we got competition from places that never existed before: Wayfair, Amazon.
Yeah, well,
Home Depot.
The general manager of Kroger's tech program, Kroger, the largest grocer in the country, was talking about how they're competing. They're a 130-year-old company competing with companies that didn't exist a year ago. I mean, it's very true. So what you did for 40 years worked for 40 years. It's, it might have been right for you then, but it's wrong for you now. Like, I can assure you of that. And that's how this is from, we came from a 130-year-old company, man. Like, we were not running the same way.
The internet's really changed all of that.
The internet's changed it. And I think there's been a lot of consolidation. So, like, who was it? One of our contacts was telling us, flooring in particular, the retail market took a hit in the recession. They got cut either by like 30 or 40%, like overall. And, speaking of that, the reason we were looking at mills, in 10, hardwood production bottomed out. It was at 46% of the prior peak.
Woo.
Yeah. So, I mean, over half the market literally got wiped out overnight. Yeah. So, I mean,
that's how the real estate industry was too.
Well, exactly. I mean,
so $500,000 home overnight, it's now $250,000.
Well, and that was part of the problem that the hardwood market faced. And I think, sometimes it was like at that point, money was so loose that, everyone who decided they wanted to saw lumber, like, went and built a sawmill. And you've got all these people sawing all this lumber. And then all of a sudden the demand dries up, and only the people who weren't leveraged, who were fixing their buying smart.
Yeah.
Because obviously if you got a lot of logs on the ground, you got to saw them. It costs money to run your equipment, stuff like that. Same with the flooring dealers or the kitchen and bath stores and the builders. I mean, holy crap. Yeah. Like, the builders got wrecked. Yeah, absolutely. So to move along, I know we've only got a few minutes here left. Looking at the forecasting piece, and again, this is just intended to be fundamentals, kind of a framework. The key items, cannot hammer enough on historical sales. Where have we been? Our historical purchases, we've got to know what we've bought and how much we've bought. So what you really want to do here is you want to take a hard look at historical sales and historical purchases, and you've got to be able to look and say, hey, we've been buying the right stuff. Our stock mix matches our sales. Or you have to be willing to say, we're buying too much of product A, or we're buying too much of product B. We need to trim back on that because we don't sell that much in the past. And looking forward into our future demand, what our current customers want, we don't see the demand picking up. So that's how you need to trim back on an item that you're stocking. If it's 80-20 rule, if it's not selling, get rid of it. It doesn't make any sense to keep it. And also for forecasting, you've got to look at the current stock, just like I was talking about. Do we have the right stock to meet this demand? Hopefully at this point, you figured out what your product mix looks like. You're stocking the right things. If you don't have the right stock, then you go out, then you purchase what you need in accordance with your future demand, so you're not over purchasing. That's a lot. Again, you don't want to tie money up somewhere where you don't need it. Cash is king. Cash is always king. So, making sure that you're only buying what you need to in order to satiate the demand is really where it's at, that matching your inventory purchasing to your sales. And you've got to keep in mind your lead times, right? So when we analyze our current stock, if there's stuff we don't have, when can we have them? What's that look like? So that's kind of, really the key takeaway. Again, this is much more kind of ground level. This can get highly complex. It's as complex as you make it, really. So just kind of going into it, though, and before we wrap up here, I do want to make sure that I'm breaking down for everyone kind of what we look at when we think about each of these items. So historical sales, what is that? It's performance by product type. It's performance by product subtype, and I've got some examples here. Seasonality, for example, we know that we're going to sell more of product A in the fall, and we know we're going to sell more of product C in the spring. And then going back to this whole idea, do my historical sales match my historical purchasing? Always want to be looking at that. And when we look at future sales, so we're not looking at past performance, we're looking at demand. What is being asked of my business right now? What do my customers want that I'm actively trying to sell? So we look at the same metrics basically as the historical sales, but we're looking into the future. So you go into your CRM system, you take a look at all the leads that have been entered and call it the last 30 days. You look at who they are, you look at what materials and products they're interested in. You dive into those, you get with your team, you figure out what the timeline is for the buyer to be purchasing that. So do they need it today? Do they need it in 60 days? Do they call it 4:30 in the afternoon on a Thursday and want it on your truck the next morning and delivered yesterday, basically? So, that's always the joy, one of the joys of distribution.
I think one of the big things about this too is, why do they have that demand at this point in time too, right? Is it from a sale that you're running? Is it from a new trend that's happening in 2017?
Yeah, it's understanding your customers too, as much as you kind of understand what your vendors can get you. Again, having, like I was talking about earlier, having those conversations, trying to figure out what really is going on and what's driving their needs.
Keeping up with the education of everything that's happening in the marketplace. It's moving faster than a lot of us can keep up with. So it's a constant, back and forth with, trying to, obviously stay ahead of the curve, right?
And these are all data points. So all of this information is all data. What your customers want, what your customers need, like looking into your pipeline, having those conversations, logging those conversations in your CRM so you actually know like what's going on. Because if you don't keep track of it, you can't measure it, you can't act off of it. It's not actionable. Like, it's just an idea.
Human nature takes over, right?
Yeah, look, man. If I don't have my calendar, I don't know where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
So it's if I don't have my CRM, I don't know who I'm supposed to call. Like, it's we're human, right? We all forget. So back to this idea of, do we have the capacity based off of what's in stock to meet this demand? If you do, that's awesome. If you don't, you want to know where the shortfall is. How much is the shortfall? In our business, it was always, are we short a unit? Are we short a truckload? Are we short a whole cut, which is several truckloads? And then how long is it going to take me to get that in stock? Again, coming back to servicing your customer. We always talk about this. Sales is not transactional. It's an experience. When you know this stuff, you know what your vendors can do. You know what your customers need. You can create a much better customer experience. Then you become their preferred vendor.
That's a great point you bring up, in terms of servicing your customer. I think it's evolved into more of the customers wanting to be served and service. They want you to be proactive and have this ready and understand what the need's going to be before they actually need it.
Yeah, they don't have time.
They don't want you to be reactive. They want you to be proactive.
No, they don't have time to come to you. I mean, they expect you. And if you
call
make
the Amazon experience,
if you make them come to you, I mean, that's just a point of friction. It's just and if you know all this stuff, I mean, you're delivering way more insight, value, and all of that
experience that they expect now, right?
Yeah, that's what they're looking for, and that's what it takes to keep up, and that's what it's going to take to survive in the long run, to create a sustainable business. So at the end of the day, to wrap it up, when we put all this together, really we're doing a couple things here. We're taking our past performance, and that's giving us our kind of our optimal stock mix. We're looking at our future demand, and that's going to help us figure out what our optimal purchasing scenarios are. If any of you are out there trying to plan your cash flows, all this stuff can help you predict your cash flow. If you know how much of each item you need and you've got it in stock and you have the right amount in stock, and then you can look into your CRM, you can see the future demand for those items, you're going to know how much you're going to have to purchase. Because remember, we know what our monthly labor costs us. I mean, it's not, we know what payroll tax is. We know all that. We know what rent is, all that stuff. So
not going to change.
Right. So we figure out what we need to buy. We plan our cash flow accordingly. And then really, ultimately what we wind up doing is we eliminate over purchasing. So we're not spending money on things that we don't sell. And we stop stocking the items that don't sell. And really, like, we've got the little dollar signs, we make more money. And that's the name of the game. Like that, that's what this is all about. That I'm aware of. None of us are non-for-profits or not nonprofits. So that said, we certainly appreciate your time. Feel free to check us out, and thank you, Kyle, for letting me step in on one of your webinars.
Awesome, definitely appreciate it, Chase. A lot of great content, guys. Just to reiterate what Chase had said, what we talked about in the beginning. Feel free to check us out on our various social media channels here: Facebook, Twitter, at the Lead Tool, Instagram included. A lot of great content, a lot of great information available to you. We will be sending this out via email, so feel free to share it with your team. Otherwise, you'll probably catch it on LinkedIn, Facebook, any of these social media channels here. As well as stay tuned. We'll have additional webinars on various topics and things of that nature on a weekly basis. So again, thank you for taking some time out of your day to meet with us. Definitely appreciate it. Feel free to let us know if you have any questions. Our contact information is at the top there. Otherwise, you guys have been fantastic, and we look forward to seeing you next time.